to be a very short video that's going to explain some of the things that you saw in the reading guide. The first question is, what are the two subdivisions of the skeleton? You have the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. When I hear the word axial, the first thing I think of is axis, and so those are going to be the bones that are going to run through the midline of the body, and that's going to include the skull, the vertebral column, and the ribs. So you can see the axial skeleton right here, the skull, the vertebral column, and the ribs. The appendicular skeleton, the first thing I think of when I hear the word appendicular is appendages. So you can see you've got the arms, the legs, and what we call the girdles as well. So this would be the pelvic girdle, these hip bones here, and also the pectoral girdle, which includes the collarbone, aka the clavicle, and the scapula, aka the shoulder blade. Some examples of bones that you would see: really anything that you can label on the skull, anything that you can label on the vertebral column, so on and so forth. Any of those things are going to be your axial bones. As far as your appendicular bones, literally anything else in the arms and legs that you can come up with would be an example of an appendicular bone. The four body structures that you find in the skeletal system are joints, cartilage, ligaments, and bones. Some of the major functions of the skeletal system: bones are of course going to support our body. They're going to protect soft organs in the form of our ribs. They're going to allow us to move, but we can't just move our bones themselves. Okay, we have to move those in conjunction with our muscular system. So the muscular system is going to help that situation along. The skeletal system is also going to allow us to store minerals like calcium and phosphorus, things like that, also fats. And lastly, it's going to allow us to form blood cells through a process called hematopoiesis. Calcium and phosphorus are the minerals that are stored in the bones, as I mentioned earlier. The adult skeleton, 206 bones, okay, and that's actually down from roughly 300 bones in the fetal skeleton. But remember, those aren't actually bones; those are actually just like cartilage molds, basically, or models of what our bones should be. But 206 bones in the adult skeleton. Our bones, we have four classifications. We've got long bones, short bones, flat bones, and irregular bones, and that's exactly what they seem. Okay, a long bone is going to be longer than it is wide. Okay, it's going to be things like our femur, humerus, fibula, tibia, so on and so forth. Short bones are going to be like our wrist bones and our ankle bones. Those are called our carpals and our tarsals. Those are going to be little cube-shaped bones, and they're just like little squares. Flat bones are going to be thin and flattened out, pretty obvious there. The bones of the skull, like the temporal bone, the parietal bone, the frontal bone, so on and so forth, those are going to be some of the flat bones. And irregular bones are going to be some of the bones that really don't have a good shape that we can, put into any of these other categories. Basically, if it doesn't fit into any of the other classification categories, it's going to be an irregular bone. And here's some examples: long bone, short bones, a flat bone, and an irregular bone like a vertebra. This wants you to take a look at the following bone markings. There's a lot of different ones. I'm going to let you just take a look at the PowerPoint for this portion and get these written down. It's going to be hard for me to explain these. What I'm going to need you to do is go in your book and take a look at each one of these. That's going to be the best situation for you, so that you can actually see what these things are doing. But these are just going to be things that you're going to need to be aware of and things that you're going to need to know. There's some more. Trying to see, I'll at least pronounce them for you: tuberosity, crest, trochanter, tubercle, epicondyle, ramus, condyle, and head. And those are the ones that you're going to want to be aware of. Oh, also there's some more: meatus, not meatus, but meatus, sinus, fossa, fissure, and foramen. And some people say foramen. If you want to say foramen, I'm fine with that. Also, some people say foramen, which I'm fine with as well. You'll probably actually hear me say foramen most often. Three major parts of the axial skeleton: skull, spinal column, and bony thorax, which is the rib cage. Two sets of bones on the skull. You've got cranial bones, or the cranium, which is going to be the flat bones on top of your head, the frontal bone, occipital bone, and the two parietal bones, which are going to encase the skull. Okay, all the other bones are going to be facial bones. Those are going to be the bones that actually make up your face. The joints that make up the skull are called sutures, and those are like the little wavy, squiggly lines all over the skull. The big hole in the occipital bone on the bottom of the skull is called the foramen magnum. So if you flip over a skull, you'll see a big giant hole that the spinal cord goes through, and after it goes through that hole, it's actually then called the brain stem. But the brain stem and the spinal cord are directly attached. Once it leaves the foramen magnum, then it's now the spinal cord. The largest facial bone is the mandible. That's going to be your jawbone, that big bone that you move up and down when you're chewing. That's your mandible. The hyoid bone is going to be unique because it doesn't actually touch any other bone. It's just like a random bone sitting in your throat area that's attached by ligaments and some other things. Oh, and it also provides a base for your tongue. The fetal skull is a very interesting type of situation because we have these cartilaginous areas within here known as fontanelles. Okay, and the fontanelles are just, like I said, like they're just little cartilage pieces, and basically they allow for the skull to be compressed during childbirth. Okay, now those fontanelles, as you continue to grow, will end up hardening up into bone eventually, but that's the situation that we have to begin with. Okay, so these are called fontanelles. That's part of the fetal skull. And you've got all of these little cartilaginous areas that all will eventually harden up into the skull that we have right now. Special names of the first and second vertebra. First one is the atlas, and the second one is the axis. Also known as C1 and C2. Okay, C1 because it's part of the cervical portion of the spine. Cervical vertebra 1, cervical vertebra 2. Atlas, axis. Some fibrocartilage discs called intervertebral discs are going to be the things that actually separate all of the vertebra in our spinal cord. Excuse the bell. We have three conditions which affect the back. You have scoliosis, which most of y'all have probably heard. They do scoliosis screenings when you're in elementary school. That's a lateral curvature of the spine, okay, meaning it's going to go from side to side. Kyphosis is a curvature of the upper back, so that's going to give you that hunchback situation. And lastly, you have lordosis, which is a curvature of the lower back, and that is also known as sway back. The coccyx is the very last bone on the spinal cord. It's actually made up of 4 fused vertebrae that all fuse together. That's the very last bone that you have on the bottom of your spinal cord. It's just below the sacrum, which is the sacrum is 5 fused vertebrae. The nickname of the sternum is the breastbone. Okay, that's that bone that all of your ribs attach to. Excuse that bell again. Sorry about that. As far as ribs go, you have 12 pairs of ribs. You have false ribs and true ribs. Okay, true ribs are going to attach directly to the sternum via what's called costal cartilage. Okay, and the false ribs are going to be the bottom 5 pairs, and those are all going to attach indirectly to the sternum, meaning that their cartilaginous pieces are going to sort of funnel into one large cartilaginous piece, which is then going to attach to the sternum. So you can kind of see that area. Here's that funneling sort of deal, and then these are going to funnel into here. And then these last little guys down here are actually called floating ribs. The reason they're called floating is because they don't even attach to the sternum. And that's it, folks. So that's the reading guide. Best of luck to you, and that's the end of this video. Thanks for listening.